A $500,000 Ferrari SF90 Stradale. Dead. Silent. Sitting in a parking garage in Los Angeles, with less than 4 hours before the biggest contract signing of Olivia Carter's career, $50 million on the table, and not a single engineer in the city could tell her why her car refused to start. 3 specialists, 3 diagnoses, all pointing to the same answer: ship it to Europe. 2 weeks minimum. She didn't have 2 weeks. She had a desperation Google search of 4.8-star garage on the edge of town, and a mechanic in oil-stained coveralls who looked up at her like she was just another Tuesday. Olivia looked at him. Then she said it flat, almost amused. "Fix this Ferrari, then we'll talk." She expected nothing. What she got changed everything. Olivia Carter had built her company from a single product launch and 12 employees in a rented office to one of the most recognized tech firms on the West Coast. She didn't get there by waiting. She got there by making decisions faster than everyone else and never once second-guessing the result. That reputation was worth more to her than the Ferrari, more than the penthouse, more than anything she could put a number on. And in 3 hours and 47 minutes, she was supposed to walk into a conference room and sign a $50 million partnership agreement that would define the next decade of her career. The Ferrari SF90 Stradale had been a gift to herself after closing the last major deal. Custom paint, bespoke interior, one of fewer than 200 in the country, configured exactly this way. It wasn't just transportation. It was proof. Every time she pulled into a parking structure or a valet line, it said something before she opened her mouth. That morning, it said nothing. It sat in her private garage, completely silent, refusing to start. There were no warning lights, no error messages. The hybrid system didn't flicker or stutter, it simply didn't respond. She pressed the start button 3 times before accepting that something was genuinely wrong, then called the number she had for Ferrari's certified service team. The first technician arrived within 40 minutes. He connected a high-end OBD diagnostic unit, ran a full system scan, and came back with a look on his face that Olivia recognized immediately, the look of someone who doesn't have an answer, but needs to sound like they do. He told her the onboard electronics were complex, that the SF90's hybrid architecture required specialized tools, and that the safest path forward was to transport the vehicle to Ferrari's European Technical Center for a full diagnostic review. Minimum turnaround 2 weeks. Olivia thanked him and called a second specialist before he'd left the building. The second expert arrived with a different diagnostic system and the same conclusion. He used different words: advanced integrated powertrain interface, multi-layer fault protocol. But the recommendation was identical. Ship it to Europe. 2 weeks. He spent 40 minutes running tests that produced the same result the first technician had reached in 20. He also charged $400 for the visit. She called a third. He didn't even bring diagnostic equipment. He walked around the car, asked a few questions, and told her that without the proprietary Ferrari software system, there was nothing he could do on site. He suggested the European Technical Center. He also had the nerve to leave a business card. 3 specialists, 3 visits, 0 solutions. And the clock was still moving. What bothered Olivia most wasn't the outcome. She'd handled worse setbacks than a dead car. What bothered her was the pattern. Each specialist had arrived with confidence, spent time running through their process, and arrived at the same conclusion the one before them had. None of them had questioned the conclusion. None of them had looked at the problem from a different angle. They had each followed the same path and been surprised to find the same dead end. In her industry, she called that kind of thinking a liability. Standing in her garage, watching the third man drive away, she was starting to feel the cost of it personally. Ryan, her assistant, had been standing near the garage entrance for most of this, tablet in hand, watching the situation deteriorate in real time. He was efficient, precise, and rarely offered opinions unless asked. When Olivia looked at him after the third specialist left, He already had his phone out. "I've been searching while you were on calls," Ryan said. "There's a garage about 6 miles from here. Jake's Auto. 4.8 stars on Google, over 200 reviews. Most of them mention diagnostics on imports and European models. It's not a dealership. It's independent." He looked up from the screen. "It's the best option I can find right now." Olivia didn't answer immediately. She looked at the car. Then she looked at the time on her phone. 3 hours and 12 minutes. "Get the tow truck," she said. Jake Miller had been at the garage since 6:30 that morning. He'd opened early to finish a brake job on a neighbor's pickup before the day's real work started, and by the time the tow truck pulled up outside at 9:45, he was already on his second coffee and halfway through a suspension inspection on a 2-year-old sedan. The morning was ordinary. Most mornings were. The garage had been his father's before it was his. Same sign out front, same layout inside, same smell of oil and metal and concrete that Jake had grown up with. He'd repainted the walls twice, upgraded the lifts, added a decent diagnostic station in the corner with equipment he'd saved up for over 2 years. But the bones of the place were unchanged. It was a working garage, not a showroom. The floor had seen 15 years of daily use, and it showed. The tools on the wall were organized the way his father had organized them, by habit and logic rather than appearance. Nobody came here expecting marble floors, and nobody who knew what they were looking at would mistake the place for anything less than what it was, a shop run by someone who took the work seriously. He heard the tow truck before he saw it, and when he stepped outside and watched the SF-90 Stradale being lowered onto the lot, he stood still for a moment. He'd worked on Italian sports cars before, a handful of older Ferraris, 2 Maseratis, a Lamborghini that had come in with a coolant issue 3 years ago. But the SF-90 was a different generation entirely. Hybrid architecture, 6-figure electronic software layers that most independent shops had no business touching. He knew what it was. He also knew he'd seen similar failure patterns in hybrid systems before on less exotic vehicles. The platform was different. The principles weren't. A woman stepped out of the black SUV that had followed the tow truck. She was dressed for a boardroom-fitted blazer heels that had no business being on a garage floor, the kind of composure that made it clear she was used to rooms adjusting to her rather than the other way around. 2 men followed her out. One was Ryan, her assistant, phone already in hand. The other was a broad-shouldered man named Marcus, who handled logistics and security for high-value assets. He positioned himself near the car, immediately arms crossed, watching the lot the way someone does when they've been told to keep an eye on something expensive. Jake wiped his hands on a shop rag and walked over. The woman looked at the car, then at Jake. Her eyes moved across his coveralls, the oil stain on the left sleeve, the worn knees, the name patch above the pocket. Her expression didn't shift dramatically. It was something quieter and more dismissive than that. The look of someone running a calculation and arriving at a low number. "This is your garage?" she asked. "Has been for 15 years, Jake said. She glanced back at the Ferrari, then at Jake again. When she spoke, her voice was level, almost bored, like she was already thinking about the next problem on her list. "Fix this Ferrari," she said. "Then we'll talk."
Jake held her gaze for a second. He didn't say anything right away. He thought about the invoice on his desk, 3 months of overdue rent, a number he'd been rearranging in his head for weeks, trying to find a way to make it work. He thought about Lily, about the conversation they'd had at breakfast that morning, about how she'd asked if they were going to have to move again. He'd told her no. He needed that to stay true. He looked back at the woman and gave a single nod.
"Pull it onto the lift," he said. Marcus and Ryan didn't leave. Ryan stationed himself near the garage entrance with his tablet, updating Olivia on the time every few minutes. Marcus moved closer to the lift, arms crossed, watching Jake the way a security guard watches someone who has just walked into a store with a large backpack. Neither of them said anything at first. They didn't need to. Their presence made the point clearly enough. Every move Jake made was being observed, measured, and recorded against the value of the car sitting on his lift. Jake ignored both of them and got to work. The first thing he did was not what they expected. He didn't reach for the diagnostic tablet on his workbench. He didn't connect any equipment to the car. He crouched beside the SF-90, opened the access panels one by one, and started looking. Just looking, running his eyes across the wiring harnesses, the connection points, the physical joints between components. His hands moved slowly and deliberately, checking each connector by touch before moving to the next. It was the kind of inspection that didn't look impressive from the outside. No screens, no readouts, no beeping equipment, which was exactly why Marcus felt the need to speak. Those other technicians already ran full diagnostic scans, Marcus said. High-end OBD equipment. If there was something to find, they would have found it. Jake didn't look up. They were looking for what the software could see, he said. I'm looking for what it can't. Marcus didn't have an answer for that. He took out his phone and started filming. Olivia stood near the garage wall, away from the car and away from her associates. She had her phone in her hand but wasn't using it. She was watching Jake. Not because she expected him to succeed. She had already begun mentally preparing for the reality that the contract meeting would need to be rescheduled, that she would have to call the partner company and absorb whatever damage that caused to the relationship, but because there was something in the way he moved that she found unexpectedly deliberate. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't performing for the audience standing 10 feet away. He was simply working with the focused economy of someone who had done this long enough that urgency no longer changed his pace. She had been in enough rooms with enough high-priced professionals to recognize the difference between someone who projected competence and someone who actually had it. The projectors filled space with equipment, with terminology, with the performance of thoroughness. Jake filled nothing. He just worked, and somehow that was more unsettling to her than confidence would have been, because she couldn't find the angle he was playing. She checked the time. 2 hours and 50 minutes remaining. Jake had been working for just under 30 minutes when he found it. It was in the battery management system, a connector no larger than his thumb, seated in a housing deep inside the hybrid power interface. At first glance, it looked fine, properly seated, no visible damage, no burn marks, nothing that would draw attention. But when Jake pressed a clean cloth against the contact point and pulled it back, the cloth came away with a faint gray residue. Oxidation. Microscopic corrosion on the electrical contact surface, barely visible to the naked eye, but enough in a system as sensitive as the SF-90's hybrid architecture to create an intermittent signal break. Not a full failure. Not a clean fault code. Just enough interference to trigger the system's self-protection protocol and lock the entire car down. The reason the OBD scans hadn't caught it was straightforward. The oxidation was too light to produce a consistent signal fault. The software needed a repeatable, measurable error to log a code. This one flickered present enough to cause a shutdown, absent enough to stay invisible on a diagnostic screen. The specialists had been looking for a fault the computer could name. The computer had never been given one. Jake stood up, walked to his workbench, and selected a contact cleaning kit. Then he walked back to the car. Olivia had moved closer without realizing it. "Did you find something?" she asked. "Connector in the BMS housing," Jake said. "Oxidized contact point. It's causing an intermittent signal break, just enough to trigger the protection lockout, but not enough for the diagnostic software to register a fault code." He held up the cloth with the gray residue. "That's why nobody found it. They were looking at the data. The problem isn't in the data." Olivia looked at the cloth, then at Jake. "And cleaning it will fix it." "Cleaning it addresses the cause," Jake said. "There's a second step after that. But first things first." Ryan had come closer as well, standing just behind Olivia. Marcus lowered his phone slightly, though he kept it recording. Olivia looked at the car, then back at Jake. She had spent the last 3 hours listening to specialists explain why the problem was too complex to solve quickly. Every logical instinct she had said this was too simple, that a problem which had defeated 3 certified professionals couldn't come down to a dirty connector and a cleaning kit. But the logic she'd been working with all morning had produced nothing. She gave a short nod. Do it. Jake cleaned the connector carefully, aerosol first, then a fine brush in small circular motions, then a second application, and a dry cloth to remove any residue. He inspected the contact surface under a work light until the gray was gone and the metal showed clean beneath. Then he reseated the connector, closed the housing, and secured the panel. He straightened up and looked at Olivia. Try it. Olivia walked to the driver's side, lowered herself into the seat, and pressed the start button. Nothing. The garage was completely quiet. The SF-90 sat on the lift, unresponsive, exactly as it had been when the tow truck delivered it 2 hours ago. The silence lasted about 4 seconds before Marcus spoke. I told you. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the garage without effort. He looked at Olivia, not at Jake. We need to stop losing time here and get the car transported to a facility that can actually handle it. Ryan said nothing, but his expression confirmed what he was thinking. He had found the garage. He had recommended it. If this failed, some fraction of that failure belonged to him, and he knew it. Olivia stepped out of the car. Her jaw was set. She looked at Jake with something that was no longer dismissal, but wasn't confidence either. It was the look of someone who had just watched their last option fail and was now doing the arithmetic on damage control. I have 2 hours and 20 minutes, she said. How much more time do you need? Jake was already looking at the car. He wasn't looking at Olivia. He wasn't looking at Marcus. He was running through the sequence in his head, going back over every step, checking the logic one more time. He had the right cause, he was certain of that. The contact was clean. The connection was secure. The physical fault had been addressed. So why hadn't the system responded? And then he saw it. Not in the car, in his own process. A step he had moved past too quickly because he'd been focused on the physical repair and hadn't followed through to the end of the sequence. His phone buzzed on the workbench. He glanced at the screen. Lily. He picked it up. Hey, Bug. His voice dropped softer without effort. Lily's voice came through small and clear. Are you coming home early today? I have something to tell you about what happened at school. It's kind of a big deal. I'm going to try, Jake said. Give me a little more time, okay? I'll be there. Okay, she said. I'll wait. He set the phone down and looked back at the Ferrari. Lily would wait. She always waited. She'd been waiting for 3 years through every overdue bill and every late night, and every morning he'd told her things were going to be fine, while not being entirely sure they were. The invoice on his desk wasn't just a number anymore. It was a timeline. A few more weeks of losing ground, and the garage would close, and then everything else, the school, the neighborhood, the stability he'd worked to build for her, would follow. He was not going to let that happen. Not today. Olivia took one step toward the door. I think we need to. Give me 2 minutes, Jake said. She stopped. You said the connector was the problem. It is, Jake said. But I missed a step. He was already moving back to the workbench, reaching for a compact ECU reset device he used for hybrid systems. Cleaning the connector fixes the physical fault, but the SF-90's protection system doesn't release on its own. Once it locks, the ECU holds that state until it's manually reset. The system doesn't know the problem is gone, it's still acting on the last bad signal it received. He connected the reset device to the interface port and looked up at Olivia. The car isn't broken anymore. It just doesn't know that yet. Marcus started to say something. Olivia raised one hand, a small, flat gesture, and he stopped. 2 minutes, she said. Jake initiated the reset sequence. The ECU reset sequence took 90 seconds. Jake watched the indicator light on the reset device cycle through its stages, initializing, clearing, confirming while the garage stayed quiet around him. Nobody spoke. Marcus had stopped filming. Ryan stood with his tablet lowered against his side. Olivia stood near the driver's door, with her arms at her sides, not pacing, not checking her phone, just watching the small device in Jake's hand, like it was the only thing in the room that mattered. The indicator light turned green. Jake disconnected the device, set it on the workbench, and looked at Olivia. "Try it now," he said. Olivia got into the car for the second time. She pressed the start button. The Ferrari SF90 Stradale came to life, not with a struggle, not with a hesitation or a sputter, or the mechanical reluctance of something fighting its way back. The hybrid system initialized cleanly, the instrument cluster lit up in sequence, and then the engine turned over and settled into a low, smooth idle that filled the entire garage. The sound was perfect, controlled, like the car had never been anything other than exactly this running, ready, indifferent to the last 4 hours. Olivia sat in the driver's seat and didn't move for a moment. Her hands were on the wheel. The engine was running beneath her. The readouts showed all systems nominal. She looked through the windshield at Jake, who was standing at his workbench, wiping down the reset device with a shop rag, not waiting for a reaction, not watching her face for confirmation. He already knew. Marcus said nothing. Ryan said nothing. The garage held the moment like it hadn't decided yet what it meant. Olivia stepped out of the car. She walked to where Jake was standing. He set the shop rag down and met her eyes. "Explain it to me," she said. Her voice had changed. The flat boardroom authority was still there, but underneath it was something else now, genuine attention. The kind she gave to people who had just shown her something she hadn't seen before. Not admiration yet, something more careful than that. The recognition that she had miscalculated, and that the miscalculation had nearly cost her everything the morning had been building toward. Jake kept it brief. The oxidation on that connector was too light for the diagnostic software to register as a fault, but it was enough to break the signal threshold the SF90's protection system monitors. Car shut itself down. The specialists ran their scans, found no logged fault, and concluded the problem was complex. It wasn't complex, it was small, and after the physical fix, the ECU needed a manual reset to clear the lockout. That's a behavior specific to this hybrid generation, not widely documented in standard service manuals. I knew it from a similar situation on a different hybrid platform about a year ago. He looked at her evenly. Everyone was looking for something big enough to explain the problem. Nobody looked for something small enough to be invisible. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do I owe you?" Jake named a number. Fair parts, plus labor, nothing inflated, nothing adjusted for the circumstances or the value of the car or the urgency of the morning. Olivia didn't negotiate. She didn't comment on the price being lower than she expected. She nodded at Ryan, who processed the payment without a word. Then she picked up her bag and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped. She turned back. "What's your name?" she asked. She realized she hadn't asked before. She'd been here for nearly 2 hours, and she had never once asked the man his name. "Jake Miller," he said. She nodded once, the way she noted things she intended to come back to. Then she got in her car and drove to the most important meeting of her year. The contract was signed at 12:47 in the afternoon. $50 million. The partner company's legal team had arrived early and waited in the conference room, and when Olivia walked in 7 minutes before the scheduled time, composed and unhurried, briefcase in hand, not a trace of the morning on her face, no one in that room had any idea what the last 4 hours had looked like. She shook hands, took her seat, and moved through the meeting with the same precision she brought to every room she walked into. The deal closed in under 2 hours. Afterward, her team went to dinner to celebrate. There were toasts and photographs, and the particular energy of a group of people who had worked towards something for a long time and finally arrived. Olivia stayed for one drink, smiled at the right moments, said the things that needed to be said. Then she made her excuses and left. She drove back to the garage. It was past 7 in the evening when she pulled up. The main bay doors were half closed, the overhead lights still on inside. Jake was at the workbench, finishing paperwork on the day's jobs, the brake work from that morning, the suspension inspection, the Ferrari parts order he needed to submit before the end of the week. He heard the SF-90 before he saw it, and looked up when Olivia walked in through the side door. She wasn't in the blazer anymore. She'd changed after the signing into something less formal dark jacket. No heels, the version of herself that wasn't performing for anyone. She looked around the garage slowly, the way people look at a place when they're seeing it for the first time, without the filter of crisis pressing against every surface. The tools on the wall, the photographs tucked to the side of the workbench. Jake and a small girl with his same dark eyes standing in front of the garage sign on what looked like a summer afternoon. "The contract closed," she said. "Good," Jake said. She pulled a stool from beside the workbench and sat down without asking. Jake set down his pen and waited. "Tell me about this place," she said. "Not the technical stuff, the rest of it." Jake studied her for a moment. She wasn't performing interest. She was sitting on a shop stool in a working garage at 7 in the evening after closing a $50 million deal, and she looked like she had nowhere else she'd rather be right now. He decided to answer honestly. He told her about his father opening the garage in the early 1990s, about learning to work on engines before he was old enough to drive one, about taking the place over when he was 26, because there was no one else to take it, and he didn't want to see it close. He told her about the years when business was steady, and the years when it wasn't about the shifts in the neighborhood, the dealerships expanding their service departments, the way independent shops had to work twice as hard to hold on to customers who could be pulled away by a loyalty program and a free loaner car. He told her about Lily, about how her mother had left when Lily was 4, about how the two of them had built their own version of normal, since then about breakfast that morning, and the question she'd asked about moving. He told her about the rent 3 months overdue, a number that had been sitting on his desk, like a stone he kept picking up and setting back down. He didn't say any of it looking for sympathy. He said it because it was true, and she had asked. Olivia listened to all of it without her phone in her hand. When he finished, she said, "I have a fleet. 14 vehicles mix of makes all high-end. My current service provider is a dealership group. They charge above market, the turnaround is slow, and based on what I watched this morning, I have serious doubts about the quality of their diagnostic work." She looked at Jake directly. "I want to move the contract to you. Full fleet maintenance, scheduled service, priority response for anything urgent. It won't make you wealthy overnight, but it will cover your overhead consistently for as long as I'm running the company. I'll have Ryan drop the terms tomorrow." Jake looked at the half-closed bay doors, at the lift where the Ferrari had sat that morning, at the invoice on the corner of his desk. "That's a serious offer," he said. "I don't make other kinds," Olivia said. He thought about Lily at home waiting with her story about school. He thought about what stable actually meant for an 8-year-old who had already learned too young what the alternative felt like. He thought about his father's sign out front and what it would mean to keep it there. "All right," Jake said. "Send the terms." Olivia stood and picked up her jacket from the workbench where she'd set it. She looked at the photograph beside the bench, Jake and Lily in front of the garage sign, and then looked away without commenting on it. "One thing," Jake said. She looked at him. "Why'd you come back tonight? The car runs. The deal closed. Ryan could have sent a contract in the morning." Olivia considered the question. "Because I almost walked out before you finished," she said. "And I didn't want to be the kind of person who takes what she needs and leaves without acknowledging how she got it." She picked up her jacket. "You found in 30 minutes what 3 specialists couldn't find all morning. That deserved more than a payment confirmation from my assistant." Jake nodded slowly. "Most people don't come back," he said. "I know," she said. "I've been most people before." She walked out to the Ferrari. The engine started on the first press, clean, immediate, no hesitation. She pulled out of the lot and onto the street, and the sound of the car faded into the ordinary noise of the evening city. Jake stood in the quiet of the garage for a moment. Then he closed the bay doors, turned off the overhead lights, picked up his keys, and drove home to hear what Lily had to tell him about her day.